In which year, raise your hand if you know, did Americans for the first time elect senators instead of having them appointed by state legislatures?
1910.
Yeah, good for you. 1930, the 17th Amendment. It took us, you got to take his name. Listen, you want him sitting next to you at the next exam. It's a process, you idiots. You don't get there overnight. It's a long, it took the 13 states 6 years, colonies, 6 years to write the Constitution, and they immediately had to do 10 amendments. So what are you going to do in Afghanistan? We're going to have a democracy. Oh, what's it taste like? What the hell is a democracy? Here's Afghanistan, a wonderful country filled with wonderful people, but a little bit behind some of the rest of the world in certain areas of development. So we're going to train the Afghani police. You're going to do what? They're going to send people over to train the Afghani police. Well, let me ask you a question. If the governor of Oregon wanted to upgrade his highway patrol, how likely would he be to call on the governor of Mississippi to send up a training team? Not very. Even though they speak something resembling the same language. Because cultures are different. The interaction of a police force with the civilian population is a cultural thing, as many of you know if you've lived in or visited other countries. So the American trainers don't know anything about the history, or the culture, or the religion, nor do they know the language. So they have to use a translator. So here stands this guy, he's honest, he's dedicated, he's hardworking, and he says to the Afghani police trainees, when the heat is on, you've got to step up to the plate. And the translator says, good news, we're going to have a barbecue. You can't do that. One of the most famous incidents in translation fumbling came about in 1986 in Geneva at a meeting of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. The American delegation was headed by a woman who said, into the microphone, she said, a woman's work is never done. And the French person translated it in French is, a woman never finishes her work. Well, that is the same thing, you see. Okay, but it isn't the same thing. There was a big fight. Yeah, that's what you said. That's not what I said. Yeah, you said finish done. Because working in life, how many of you speak more than one language? Speak it well? Speak more than 2 languages? Okay. I speak 5 languages. One of which I can't use much, it's Swedish. Where do you use Swedish? It's second Swedish. But I live there, so I learned it. You can't do cross-cultural communication in someone else's language unless you're really pretty good at it, because you can make these silly mistakes. Older folks may remember that Nixon, when he was vice president, was in Moscow at the World's Fair, and we had built an American house there that had all the modern equipment, you know, for the day. And he met in that kitchen with Khrushchev, who was the Secretary General of the Communist Party, and they had something that's referred to in Google as the kitchen debate. And they got around to communism versus capitalism. And Khrushchev said in Russian, he said, the equivalent of, we will be present at your funeral. And the translator said, we will bury you. Oh, you know, that is the same thing in a sense, you see. But this is dangerous and deadly, which is why America is way behind, because it's well known that if you speak 3 languages, you're trilingual, 2 languages, you're bilingual, 1 language, and you're American. So trying to get people to understand that other countries may see things differently than we do seems to be impossible, even though everybody in America knows there are red states and blue states, there are liberals, there are Tea Party people, there are red counties, blue counties, there are red neighborhoods, blue. Even in your own family, you may have a right winger and a left winger. So if this can happen here, why would anybody be surprised that the people over there may have a totally different outlook on all sorts of things? I was taken to Turkey with a group of people, and one of the Americans with us got upset with me And he said, all right, Peck, if you were president, how would you fix this? No bullshit, no bullshit. Now just give me, how would you fix this problem? I said, you're looking for the simple solution to a complicated problem. And by definition, complicated problems don't have simple solutions, or they wouldn't be complicated. He said, yeah. I said, that's the bullshit. What would you do? I said, all right, first, I would get the American public in its entirety interested in and informed on and understanding different cultures. Then the second week, you see, I missed the point to you. So what do you do with a bunch of people who don't care and are pretty sure they already know? And that's a problem you face every day. I showed on the last cruise we took, my wife and I, a picture I clipped out of the Washington Post, and I showed it on the screen, PowerPoint, and I said to people, it says, you know, what is happening? And it's 3 polling booths and 3 women standing in it with their backs to the camera, and they're dressed in black from head to the floor. What's happening? Well, it's an election. In which country is this taking place? I said, don't guess. Ireland. They're nuns. Have you noticed that the hijab looks like something that a Roman Catholic nun wears? They're covering their hair. Oh. And did you know that Orthodox Jewish women have to cover their hair too? So in New York, where they're stylish, they shave the hair and wear a wig. There they are. But they're following the rules. In some places in the Muslim world, as many of you know, a kerchief could be considered an Islamic statement. But the women in Argentina wear the babushka too, and they don't consider it. So you have to ask the person what it is that this represents to them. In Egypt, you see an awful lot of headscarves, which are just scarves around the head. And I heard recently, this amused me, that perhaps it was a joke, that Saudi Arabia is thinking of passing a law that any French woman in the country must wear a face veil. Hey, you get work here, you gotta wear it here. Because right now, Islam has been pushed to the extreme. And certainly what's going on with guys like Gaddafi, Hosni Mubarak, who was a man I knew. I mean, he recognized me in small crowds back in those days. And somehow they lost track for various reasons and were no longer considered by us to be good guys. But as many of you know, one of the reasons that the Egyptian people were unhappy with Mr. Mubarak was the complicit behavior of Egypt in supporting what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, just on the other side of the border. They don't like that. In the 1980s, there was a revolution going on in Guatemala, a civil war, if you will. Nobody in America paid any attention whatever until 6 American nuns were killed. And then it became a big heated issue, because they were Americans involved. So if it is true, and I believe it is, that there are women's groups in America who care very deeply about the status of women in some other country where there's no connection whatsoever except the fact that they're women, but they care. Well, if this is true, why would you be surprised if Muslims care what's being done to Muslims by people who are not Muslims? Or why Arabs would care when things are being done to Arabs by people who are not Arabs? They don't like that. And we've been facilitating it for years. For years. In Gaza, Israel used cluster bombs. When Muammar Gaddafi was accused of using them, the world rose in horror. You remember a couple of weeks ago? That's illegal. But Israel used them in Lebanon as well. And Israel used white phosphorus bombs, and you know what those do? They burn right through you. Against civilians who were not rising up against the occupier. But for reasons of apathy and ignorance, and a sniveling group of people who call themselves journalists, I have to be very careful at home. My wife's entire family is journalists. But, you know, they're in business, and you can't sell your newspapers if you're going to put in it a bad rap for an automobile, because you'll lose 12 pages of automobile advertising. So they don't do that anymore. They used to. And And you can't put anything in about Palestine or Gaza because the same thing is going to happen. They'll come after you and make you sorry you did it. So they don't. Leaving our nation ill-informed, misinformed, and disinterested. So you've got to work on that. The motto of the groups that form, participate, educate, get out and spread the word, help people understand a little bit about the fact that the first two Torah are in the Quran, and so is every prophet in the Old Testament and the New Testament is in the Quran. There's just one more, Muhammad, peace be upon him. And they don't know this. Most people don't. Even if they're religious, because they look at their own testament, as it were. So help them understand. Get them to understand. Try very hard to put it in such a way that they don't rise up in anger or frustration or embarrassment. But try hard to get the people who should know to know. That is not going to be easy. In the years that I've been working in and around this issue, every time something happens, like the attack on the USS Liberty, ever heard of it? Yeah, the Israelis attacked the U.S. Navy ship and killed and wounded 204 American sailors in the '67 war, and who cares? The United States turned its back on it. I've worked with the survivors a little bit. They are savagely bitter, not against Israel, but against the government of the United States that left them, without any recognition or compensation. So they don't know about that. It's kind of hard to tell them about it. You can Google it. There's books written, there's movies been made about the attack on the Liberty, but it still remains unknown because it's offensive to a certain segment of our country. I repeat what I started out with. No one in their right mind should want anything bad to happen to a single Israeli. But, ladies and gentlemen, everybody in this room has the same objective, I think. For everybody in the Middle East, what we call the Middle East, to live in peace and security. And the only thing that may divide certain segments of the group is the path to choose to get there. That's the hard part. But we know what we want, peace and security for all of it. But think about this. Peace and security can only come about if everybody is living in peace and security. Israel can't live in peace and security by itself if the countries around it are not living in peace and security. That just is not a definition. It won't work that way. And Americans forget these things. I had a very nice contract with NBC back in the first Gulf War, and I was in the Washington studio when the first Scuds from Iraq went into Tel Aviv area, if you remember. They didn't hit Tel Aviv, nobody was killed, but they fired Scuds there. And Tom Brokaw said to me, I have this on tape, it was a great moment in American television. He said, Ambassador Peck, can you explain to our viewers why Iraq would have launched this unprovoked attack on Israel? I said, well, you can call it a lot of things, Tom, but unprovoked isn't one of them. He said, what do you mean? I said, 10 years ago, Israel bombed Baghdad. Now, the Americans have forgotten all about that, but I very much doubt that the Iraqis have. I mean, who cared about that? We should have cared, because it did sow the seeds for a lot of what's happening now between the United States and Iraq. Here's a country out in that part of the world which has been overrun and invaded 16 times in recorded history. The Sassanians, the Babylonians, the Seljuks, the Mongols, the Israelis, the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians. Oh my God. So they're going to welcome Americans, right? And they're going to strew rose petals at the feet of our soldiers coming in. What country in the world has ever welcomed invaders? Liberators, yeah. The French going back into France in World War II. But invaders? After what they've been through? You must be kidding me. Some of this becomes more personal than I intended, but I did a big NPR interview when I was trying to get the American government to understand what I thought what might happen if they invaded. And several years later, I was back on NPR on their Saturday morning show, and the guy said, you know, yesterday we played the tape that you made of your interview, and every single thing that you said was going to happen if we invaded Iraq has happened. Doesn't that make you proud? And I said, not at all. I didn't want to be right. I didn't want it to happen. But all the people running around bellowing about how Iraqis are going to behave have never been to Iraq, or lived in Iraq, or spoke Arabic. So I'm trying to tell you what's going to happen if you don't fix the problem. And I hope I'm wrong, but it's going to be a tragedy of galactic proportions in the Middle East unless we can alter dramatically the course that's being followed by everybody out there, including especially the United States of America. And with that, what I thought I would do at this stage is switch over to questions. You going to moderate or do I take it? Okay, questions, comments, sir?
Okay, you made a fantastic job talking about cultural issues. Okay, in the United States, it has been very lucky. It's a great country, but remember that the United States didn't suffer big wars like in Europe, you know, and the rest of it. So the U.S. has neighbors in Canada, Mexico has won the war, you know. So, in a sense, it's arrogant, imperialistic. Let's remember, for example, that the United States has 4% of the population, and it consumes more than 1/4 of the oil of the world. So LA is crazy, you know, the traffic, you know, the cars, you know, the airport systems.
I've seen them, yeah.
So what's the problem? The multinationals, the big companies, are controlling the U.S. economy. Okay? So the multinationals, transnationals, big companies, control the company, the United States apart from the world, and they are democratic. They are nobody elected this year, right? So they're democratic, and they ally with countries like Saudi Arabia. They do all these things in Latin America. You talk about Israel and the Palestine. In Cuba doesn't have an American ambassador, okay? And the policy of the United States in all South America was terrible. They were supporting only terrorists. Okay? So I think we should go to the economical part also. Okay?
Sure.
Because that's the root of the problem.
Okay, and the suggestion was that in view of all of the things that we have done, said and not done, and done and not said, we should look at the economic part of it. Sure, that's absolutely true. But we have a capitalist, the free market economy, and one of the things that fascinates me about the fact that all of us are living in a capitalist free market economy where we recognize that if you want to sell a product, you have to spend a little time doing market research. What is it that the customers want? How much are they prepared to pay for it? Do they see the need for it? But we don't do that with our foreign policy, petroleum. In the 1980s, there was a gasoline shortage. You may have read about it, where because of the 73 war, Arab countries shut off the flow of oil and cars were lined up at gas stations. And America did something. They put a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit on everything everywhere to reduce the use of gasoline. Have we done that lately? No. Would we do it? No. And there are now 15 times as many cars as there were before. When I went to UCLA, I'm a UCLA graduate, we rode our horses. We didn't need parking lots. But now, talk about automobiles. Good heavens above us. And using gasoline by the boatload. But we won't put a speed limit in, and you could do that and reduce gasoline needs, oil imports, by a significant margin. Because the country is kind of soft, they don't like to be inconvenienced in various ways. But the oil companies, they're making a lot of money by raising the price of oil, are they? Even before they're using oil that's gone up in cost. It's almost as if they're trying to make money. No, let's not go that far. Capitalism is a dangerous thing. Let loose. And Congress, of course, steps right up and does the necessary thing. You must remember the words of a famous American entertainer, philosopher by the name of Will Rogers, who said, Americans are justified of being fiercely proud of the knowledge that they have the finest Congress money can buy. And that's painfully true, I'm afraid. Yes, sir, question?
One of the terms that I heard you use in reference to people who support Israel is the term pro-Israel. is a term that I am personally baffled by why this term continues to be used without being challenged. People who support Israeli policy are clearly not supporters of Israel, because it's obvious to the entire world that Israeli policy is killing Israel. It's killing the Jewish people, and it's ruining the reputation of the state, and it's driving Israel over a cliff of international isolation from which there is no return. So, as you said at the beginning of the lecture, perception is all that matters, and the way that human beings communicate their perception and kind of form their perception is through the language that we choose to use. And I think it's really irresponsible that we allow people who claim to be pro-Israel to stake their claim to that term, when what they really are is pro-Israeli policy and anti-Israel.
Well,
does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. You all heard the question, I think. And I would agree with you, except that a lot of people who are pro-Israel don't think it's going to be a bad ending. Hey, just like the invasion of Iraq.
Right.
That's going to work. You know, we knew that all we had to do was get rid of Saddam Hussein, and truth, beauty, justice, shopping malls, and beautiful flowers would burst into bloom all over the world. But that's a possibility, you see, but it's kind of on the fringes. Because the minute you get rid of Saddam Hussein, I kept saying, all sorts of things are going to happen that you have no idea of and cannot plan for because you don't know what's going to happen. And that's, of course, what worked out. But the people who are pro-Israel want to protect Israel from the ravening beasts surrounding them. And they figure that one of the ways to do it is to beat them into submission, and they won't bother you anymore. Well, I don't think that's going to work because of the numbers involved and some other factors as well, but there are people who believe this. And the other thing that you have to remember when we talk about Israeli policies is that they have a parliamentary system in which the party that runs the government is the one who has the majority votes in the Knesset. And nobody gets majorities anymore, so you have to ally yourself with the card-carrying, self-confessed wackos on the right here in order to get the votes to form a government. Thank you, Mr. Netanyahu. There are all these people who want very definitely to get rid of all the Palestinians, one way or another. Because until that happens, you can't have a safe and secure state. And they say this very openly. You know, I have met with Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, and I've met with Khalid Mashal, the guy who's the head man, or the public face of Hamas, and I've met with various people, and I get into trouble sometimes, and I had one interesting session which I thought was useful. I was going into a meeting in Philadelphia, and people were picketing there, and someone said, "Yes, you, is it true that you have met